Hey guys, welcome to the channel, and today we're going to take a look at the most famous and recognizable shotgun around the world, and that is the Winchester 1897 pump action shotgun. We're going to talk about the history behind this, what made it so successful, which is not what you think. In the modern days, we have kind of forgotten what gave this shotgun its reputation. After that, we're going to talk about what it's like to shoot, and then we're going to talk about it compared to modern shotguns, how this still stacks up in the modern age. And then lastly, we're going to talk about this specific shotgun because it has some neat history. So with that, let's get started. So for the history of the Winchester 1897, it actually starts before 1897. In 1893, the patron saint of all firearms, John Moses Browning, patented the first commercially successful slide action shotgun, the Winchester 1893. For those who don't know, slide action is the correct term for pump action. Anyway, that shotgun was very successful. It completely revolutionized shotguns from that point forward, as it did most Browning's designs across the board. In 1897, Winchester saw the writing on the wall, and they decided to upgrade to smokeless powder. Now, the problem, for those who don't know, is that you can't typically run smokeless powder in black powder firearms because smokeless powder has higher pressures. Those black powder guns just aren't meant to withstand that type of pressure. So, as a company, when you're selling two shotguns that look the same, the 1893 looks very much like the 1897, you could run into some lawsuits pretty quick if somebody started putting the wrong ammunition type through the shotgun that looks exactly the same as the new model. So what they did is they had a trade program where if you had the 1893, you could trade it in and they'd send you back a brand new 1897. So because of that, you don't see a whole lot of 1893s floating around out there. When you do, they're generally pretty rough because black powder is corrosive, and they were used a lot. I mean, they were used in the field, they were used in self-defense situations, they were used predominantly to settle the West. And because of that, if you find one, condition will be poor, but it's still worth getting. It's an extremely relevant piece of firearm history, particularly in the shotgun world. Monetarily, they're not worth a ton of money, but they're still really cool. But anyway, back to the 1897. They started producing and selling these in 1897, as the name would indicate. And they offered them in 12 gauge originally, and then later came out with the 16 gauge, which is what this one is. In the early 1900s, late 1800s, we had a little conflict called the Banana Wars in the United States, which basically we wanted to spread democracy, and by democracy, I mean the corporations wanted to get their hands into the fruit trades and other natural resources that some of these island countries had. So, of course, they sent the military to make that happen. And the long and the short was the military had slow to load rifles and ineffective, inadequate revolvers that just didn't have the stopping power to deal with the threats. So they looked at the shotguns, saw a repeating slide action shotgun, this Winchester 1897, and they adopted it as the military shotgun of choice. And the Marines received it and loved it. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, and it did it very well and reliably. Fast forward to World War I, shotguns still in service at this point. Military buys a whole bunch more of them along with other guns like Remingtons, and I think even Savage may have made some in that conflict. But there were more than just the 1897, but it's the most recognizable. And the trench gun variant looked a little bit different than this, but it is what is now most recognized when you talk about a Winchester 1897. They're known as the trench gun. What you will not see is a lot of pictures from World War I with soldiers or Marines using the trench guns. The reason being, the Germans were complaining that it was unethical, it was a war crime to use these shotguns in the trenches because, as you can imagine, I mean, it's a turkey shoot once you get inside of a trench with a shotgun that you can slam fire or repeatedly fire multiple times, shooting multiple projectiles. Wasn't it ethical? No, they were gassing people. So, and they did that in the Second World War. The Germans seem to have a thing for gassing people. I don't know what it is, but, you know, they did them, we did us. But as a countermeasure to that propaganda, I believe it was General Pershing asked reporters to not take pictures with soldiers and Marines using trench guns or even having them. So you're not going to see a whole lot of those out there. But they were used widespread and very successfully. And you'll hear, I'm digressing, but you'll hear about malfunctions because the paper cartridges got wet and then they wouldn't work with the gun. But by and large, that has been proved false because they were using, for the most part, brass shotgun shells. So they were used quite a bit. Again, that whole reliability thing and not seeing a lot of them in pictures, that was to deal with the German propaganda. Fast forward, these were used in World War II. I believe they even stayed in service through Korea and Vietnam. However, they started to get replaced by a lot of the more inexpensive Savage guns and more modern guns with a concealed hammer. And reason being, on these shotguns, when the action is back, if your thumb is right in here, it's going to bust your thumb. In fact, they were called knuckle busters or knuckle dusters, something like that. You have to watch out whenever you're running it. But as long as you're keeping your thumb over here or further back, it's not an issue. That's the military aspect of these guns. However, that is not why these are so successful. A lot of people forget that these shotguns, both the 1893 and 1897, were instrumental to settling the West. These guns provided self-defense, they were reliable, they could take game, and back in the day, a shotgun really wasn't outclassed by rifles. Yes, a rifle can shoot farther, but back in that era, you were dealing, if it was something high power, generally a single shot rifle, as where this can launch multiple shots very quickly. And most of your repeaters of the day were something similar to a pistol cartridge. So not outclassed. This gun was very relevant in that time frame. And so for American history, this thing, like I said, settled the West. Not only that, if we fast forward a little bit to the Great Depression, this thing provided food for countless families. Back then, of course, most of America was more rural with small farms, 100-acre or less farms, and the 1897 saw its fair share of hunting and putting food on the table. They're incredibly dependable, they're well made, they're robust, and a shotgun is extremely useful to somebody who just wants to put food on the plate, and also if they need the self-defense, it's there. Of course, they were used in gangs back in the day. I mean, they were used by everybody. This gun was well liked, well loved, and respected by everybody around the globe. But the thing that made this so successful was the fact that it was prevalent in almost all of that early American history. Again, in the World Wars, the Banana Wars, through the Depression, through Prohibition, settling the West. I mean, this gun was iconic and almost a household item a lot of the times. The Winchester was well known and well loved by everybody, to include hunters and trap shooters, sport shooters, things like that. There are even specific trap models of this gun that fetch a pretty high price today. So with that, let's talk about a few of the features of the gun. As mentioned, it is a slide action repeating shotgun. The tube on these, I believe, will hold 4 or 5, and then of course you get 1 in it. However, if you're using this for hunting, I think in pretty much every state in the United States, you're capped to just 3 rounds, and that includes 1 in the pipe. So this one has a plug in it, so you can only get 2 in the tube and 1 in the chamber. However, you could always remove that if you wanted to use it for self-defense or just if you're going to plink. The trigger on these, as far as shotgun goes, is about average. I mean, it's a little bit better than most modern shotguns. However, this thing has had probably thousands of rounds through it, which kind of cleans it up. These have a single action bar, which is this piece right here. On modern shotguns, you'll usually get 2, and that's to serve 2 purposes. One, it increases reliability, and two, it generally will smooth up the action of the shotgun because you don't have just one friction point here. If you're putting a lot of torque on this thing, it can slow how fast you cycle the gun. However, I found that to be a non-issue with this specific shotgun. They offered these again in 12 gauge and 16 gauge, and you had two frame options too. You could do a fixed frame, meaning that it is not a takedown, which all the trench guns were fixed frame, or you could get the takedown model, which is much more prevalent, and all you do is you pop this little button down, twist. At this point, you pull the slide forward, and then it comes apart. This is pretty convenient because most of these shotguns were around like 28 to 30 inches, somewhere in there. And if you're going to hunt, and particularly back in the day, a lot of families didn't have a pickup or a truck. They were throwing it in a trunk of a vehicle. It's just easier to transport if you can break it down. And then assembly is super quick. There you go. You're ready for business. So as far as the user controls go, this does have a slide release. When the hammer's down, you just simply pump. And then from this point, if you wanted to open the gun, it's locked up. So watching your thumb, you would push the slide release button, pull forward and then back, and it ejects the shell. The other thing with these is you can't just pull straight back. You generally have to give it a little bit forward and then back to unlock it. As you can see, the steel falls out of the bottom. You've got this piece coming out the back, which kind of dates the gun. You know, a modern shotgun's not going to do that. And by modern, I really mean anything about after 1915 or so. Most all those shotguns at that point, everything was concealed inside of the gun. Again, from a user perspective, that's kind of nice because you don't have to worry about your thumb. You don't have to worry about anything down here either. But this shotgun was still extremely popular because of how well it performed despite those things. And those controls are going to be found on all your 1897s. Now, of course, you do get into slight variations. If you got like a trap grade, I believe they call them the black diamond. They actually have a little black diamond shape here on the grip. Generally, the grade of walnut was much higher quality, and the finish was a lot better. Then, of course, you had your trench guns, which those would have had a heat shield with sling on it, a bayonet or a bayonet lug, things of that nature, and those would be chopped down to a 20-inch barrel. Then you had your riot configurations, which would look a lot like this, just with a 20-inch barrel. So there were a ton of different configurations, and again, you got 2 gauges to choose from. As far as maintaining one of these shotguns go, it does take a little bit more skill than, say, a modern shotgun. You're not just going to simply field strip this thing in a few minutes and clean it. And the main reason being is there's a lot of screws on it, like this one being your carrier screw. You've got some screws on the side here. If I remember correctly, you're also going to need a punch to take different things apart, and that's not necessarily every time you need to clean it, but regardless, even if you're just taking it down a little bit, you're going to need the right screwdrivers to do it, and you're going to need a little bit of know-how on how to do that. Not overly difficult, but that's probably another reason this shotgun was phased out. And of course, this was replaced by the Winchester Model 12. However, they sold side by side for quite some time. And the Model 12 by no means is a lot easier to take apart than this either. But as time went on, better methods came about to take care of these guns. And you will find, if you pick up an 1897, that it probably hasn't been cleaned in decades. And that's because most guys just wanted a gun they could take out, shoot, throw in the closet, and then next time they hunted, take it out. And that's the abuse a lot of these did see. So understand, if you buy one, probably going to need to buy a set of gunsmithing screwdrivers and then be willing to spend the time to take this apart and clean it up. Once you do, you will have a very smooth and well-made shotgun that'll last for years. So how do these compare to modern shotguns? Well, I think we need to whittle that down a little bit to how do they compare to modern pump action shotguns. And in that situation, I think they're pretty on par. They're still relevant. Everything you would need a pump action shotgun for, this can pretty well do with a few limitations. Number one, these are only chambered in 2 3/4 inch shells. So no, you can't use 3 3/2 inch out of these. In addition to that, if you're turkey hunting or duck hunting and you need a more powerful 2 3/4 inch load, take it to your gunsmith with the ammo you intend to shoot and make sure that it's safe to shoot it in this gun. Because when this was designed, they didn't have all of the different types of ammunitions and loadings that we have today. If you're going to use buckshot in it, same thing. nothing worse could happen than if you needed to use this for self-defense. You loaded up, you pulled the trigger, and then instead of the bolt stopping here, it just went on through your eye because you used an incorrect load. So the simple thing is, whatever you intend to shoot out of it, take it to an actual gunsmith and make sure it can handle that. Another limitation is, of course, the fixed choke. These were made at a time where you didn't have adjustable chokes, or if you did, they were the twist type, like the poly chokes. And it is not uncommon to see poly chokes on one. If you're going to buy one of these to hunt with and shoot a lot instead of collect, I would absolutely get one with some type of poly choke. They should be cheaper because they've been modified, and for what you're using it for, the ability to switch between chokes is pretty important. So with those limitations and those considerations, I think that they're still very relevant. In addition to that, this can do something a lot of modern shotguns can't do, and that's slam fire, which is completely impractical but a ton of fun. And, you know, I'm sure that in the trenches of World War I, there were probably a lot of Germans that were liberated of their imperialist mindset by some American slam firing away in a trench. So I'm sure it can be done. I mean, these things have been used everywhere. They've been used for pretty much everything. And as long as you respect what this firearm is and understand how it works and what it needs to work correctly, it's an extremely viable tool. You have to think there's probably been millions of turkey and different types of fowl killed with these things over the years, and still even today I see people hunt with them. I dove hunt with this one. So they're a ton of fun. Just know what you have and respect it. As far as shooting this shotgun goes, I've kind of already touched on it in some of the previous points, but it's phenomenal. The trigger is good by shotgun standards. I would say it's a little bit better than modern shotguns, and that may just be because I have so many rounds through this, but the trigger's pretty good. In addition, for only having one action bar, it's very smooth. If I take it off a safe, it's very smooth. So it's easy to use, it's easy to shoot, it points really well, and in my opinion, it's a really good looking gun. I mean, for a pump action shotgun, I can't really ask too much more out of a gun than what this does. So as mentioned, my specific shotgun has some really neat history, and that's because this shotgun left the factory around 1906 or 1907 and was sold to a retailer, whether it be a hardware store or gun shop in my state, and then was purchased and in the same family for that entire time until I purchased the shotgun. And to me, that's really neat. In addition to that, this gun has been modified. This gun probably originally had a longer barrel, and it's been cut back to 24 inches, and it has a kind of home job brass front bead on it, but it's still pretty easy to pick up on. Now, I've not measured to see if this thing is choked or not, but if I had to guess, it's probably just cylinder. I doubt there's any choke in it. It was originally a full choke, though. Now, when I received this gun, it was in horrible condition. There was no finish left. There was a little bit of brown patina on it, but by and large, it was just exposed metal, pitting, and rust. The bore is also pitted, but not so bad that I can't shoot it. It's kind of a bummer, but again, in terrible condition. The wood looked like it had been refinished several times. It had chips in it and flaking. It had been varnished at least a couple of times, and it was super sluggish to work the action. It was a chore to run the action on this gun. This is one of those that had been hunted with and used on a farm probably for decades and just never cleaned. When they needed it, it worked. That's how they used it, and it just got gummed up and eventually neglected. Additionally, this one, somebody did engrave their name into it, B. Hartman. There in the side, which is scratched in there. Hopefully that comes through. But I was able to sand this thing down, both the metal and the wood stock. I put on some cold bluing. I used Brownell's Oxbow blue, which turns out really well most of the time, and then I refinished the stock. When I got this thing, there's no collector value. Barrel's already been modified. The gun was in horrendous shape. It just wasn't a good deal from the get-go, but I knew that when I purchased it. It took me about 2 weeks to completely refinish it, and I love it. I mean, this gun was totally disassembled, cleaned, and now it is smooth. It shoots great. Like I said, it shoots clays really well. It shoots doves really well. This thing does everything I want it to do, and I absolutely love it. And when you can kind of find out the history of a shotgun, or any gun for that matter, it makes it unique. And so knowing that this is with the same family, knowing that somebody used this like it's supposed to be used, put food on the table, provided for their family, that's just really cool to me. And the other cool thing is it's in the same town that I live close to. So they live kind of on the other side of town from where I live, but just the history is neat to know that this spent all of its time in my state providing food and probably providing a lot of fun too. So really neat shotgun, and if you guys can pick one up, I recommend it. I would not hesitate. If it's a Winchester, if it's an Orenco or any other brand, do your research, but by and large, these guns are a lot of fun, and I think that they serve the most fun in the roles of shooting trash and shooting clays and hunting. So just because it's not a trench gun doesn't mean it's not cool. There's still a ton of fun. It's still a very relevant shotgun as long as you know the limitations that it has, and this thing will serve myself and my family for generations to come. So guys, as always, thank you for watching. Click all the buttons for me if you would. Drop a comment down below. And as always, and most importantly, stay free.